my specialty for years was I'm trained and practice as a recreational therapist, which is using play and recreation to work with people with disabilities. And fast forwarding after I received my PhD in recreation therapy with an emphasis in spinal cord injury rehabilitation, I became really interested and intrigued with sexual health and disability. So that is my specialty.
What was it that kind of correlated the two for you?
Yeah, I've told this story several times, and this is one of the things I love about research and also being a practitioner in rehabilitation medicine for so many years, is we were doing a survey looking at how people with spinal cord injury were managing their secondary health conditions. And my research team just decided to ask the research participants. We didn't analyze it at all. We just said, let's try to see what's missing from the rehabilitation experience. So we didn't publish on that part. We just said, let's just ask them so that we are doing research that actually makes a difference in medicine and people's lives. And so they came back and they said, Jen, everyone is saying, can someone please talk to me about sex? And then it was even delve a little bit deeper than that. It even said some of the women, they would say, you know what? They tell me, or they cover, yes, you can get pregnant, yes, you cannot. But I want to know, what's it like to communicate with my husband? How can I date online if I'm still in a wheelchair? And then the men even said that they biologically, yep, you can still get an erection, you'll have no problem, or you can't have an erection. Yet the conversation of how do I be intimate with my wife? How do I communicate with my wife? And we also had a lot of our research participants, the spouses said, hey, what about me too? I don't know, what does this mean for me sexually as well? Because now my spouse or my partner has a spinal cord injury and some form of paralysis. I still love them, but what does that look like?
It's really interesting because, you know, I've interviewed so many hundreds of people at this point, and that also includes a lot of the members of Live Jasmin. And I've interviewed several of them who they have disabilities or they're in wheelchairs, they're not mobile. And this is the exact thing that led them to Live Jasmin, which was they were still needing intimacy and they didn't have it easily accessible. And I've heard it so many times now that is something that kind of informed me that this demographic isn't really, not as looked after when it comes to sexuality. I think in general, people try to stay away from sexuality, it seems like, for some reason, culturally, but especially when it comes to certain groups, like people who have disabilities or even geriatric groups. I've heard this about a lot as well. So I think that's really beautiful work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. It's been really, really powerful. And I think it goes down to, and a couple of things when I was doing workshops and working with other people, is a couple just pivotal things that came to mind is we're all humans and we all want to connect, regardless of what our lived experience is. At the core nature, we want to be loved, we want to be desired, we want to connect on so many different levels, sexually, intimately, in so many different contexts. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of need, I think it says water, food, and sex, kind of in that context. So if you think of the basic need of connecting with other humans sexually or intimately, and if that's taken away, there's definitely different areas it impacts. It impacts just, I think, even having that feeling confident or feeling really good about who you are.
Absolutely. What would you say with your research is one of the most surprising things that you have found so far?
Oh gosh.
Or interesting or
Interesting. I know I have to think. A couple things come to mind, so I can talk about from my research and then also when I've gone and presented, like some surprising things. So A couple things from my research that really came out. I would say one research study we're doing right now with the condom use team, with the Kinsey Institute, with individuals who are blind and have low vision and on condom use is, well, first of all, one thing that was always surprising is people are so excited. So we talk about that this topic is so uncomfortable, yet when we've approached individuals with different abilities or disabling conditions, they go, thank you so much for asking the question. No one's even asked or no one's talked to me about it. So that was surprising to me that they're very, because I was hesitant when I first started doing the research. It took me a while to get the nerve. And it was one of my closest friends who's a physician in Southern California that said, this is an important topic. You need to do this. I'm like, I can't ask the question. So I think that was surprising. Then when I did, people were like, just they really opened up. And I think one of the surprising things that we've even found with our condom use and with blind and low vision is just the resources and education that's not there. So we know that sex ed in general in the US, some states don't even have the curriculum. And then when you look at it with individuals with disabilities, it's even more limited. The other thing, I guess, when I started going out and presenting and doing trainings at hospitals, what was really surprising to me, because I was so uncomfortable with the topic growing up and started interviewing all these people, and it was very emotional. It was very personal and emotional, and it was standing room only when we started doing these presentations on sex and disability. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is taboo and individuals may not come, and we never had enough chairs in the room to fill it up. So there's definitely, so then going back, I think it's fascinating to me that we're still so uncomfortable with something that gives people pleasure when it's in a safe environment, in a with a respectful partner, or, not a partner. We've had those conversations too with working with people with disabilities and with some of the sex toy companies, is that, there's so many different ways to have pleasure.
I think you use the key word. I think, and I've become a little bit of a researcher myself through.
Yeah, you have to, and what you're doing.
It seems that what society is most uncomfortable with actually is pleasure at the bottom line. So there's sexual pleasure, which is a definite, no, not comfortable with it in general. But then there's taking a long vacation, taking a long nap. We're really not comfortable with that. And I feel like, especially in American society,
Totally.
where we're just like, no, we have to work all the time. What do you mean? You're taking 2 weeks off. It's a little excessive. You know what I mean? That seems to be the tone. I still have no idea where that comes from, but
I don't either. And I think this is where, even when we started doing this work, so recreation therapy is really teaching people to have a high level quality of life with work. And it's everything from work-life balance, and it focuses on people with disabling conditions and illness. So when I first, just like you said, I thought our whole premise is quality of life, yet not one of our, I shouldn't say, I always want to be careful to say none, because someone somewhere did something before me. But it's limited, is there was no formal training about sexuality or dating or pleasure, or what does that look like? Yet, yeah, I think you're spot on, is why. And going back to the conversation with the women, and we focused on women with spinal cord injury and their sexuality, because it's a smaller group of the spinal cord injury population. Is at one point, myself and my research team, we kind of laughed like, oh, so they're talking about, yes, you can get pregnant, but they're not talking about how do you make it fun. And I'm thinking, if sex isn't fun, you're not going to get pregnant. And right. So it was like this serious conversation of, yes, you can get, but oh my gosh, let's have fun. What toys do you need? What position? What other, adaptations are out there? Let's bring a physical therapist in there. So you're right. There's this, and I think guilt around pleasure and play. So as a child, we can play and be free, and we ask a lot of questions. And at some point, and I used to ask this question when I taught a class at Sacramento State years ago of and I don't think there's a pinpoint, but where is that point where we are afraid to just, the first thing I think about is running in a playground, just screaming and being ourselves and whatever, makes us feel good. And at some point, it's like, and just even right with sexual adventures or adaptations. And one of the things I've learned with people with disability, all of our bodies work differently. Everyone's body works differently. Like we all are aging and changing. So there's going to be different ways with life circumstances that are pleasurable to us.
That's really, I love the question you asked, which is at what point did we decide it's not okay to just be ourselves and live freely? Yeah, it's like, when is that point? Because you're right, when you go to a playground, you could see the craziest things happening, right? Like, and hear the craziest things. I mean, but see, look, because I already have judgment. I'm like, it's wild what's going on there, right? But to them, it's not. Yeah. And they're just being themselves. But then at some point, we don't think it's okay to run around and, pretend we're an octopus, whatever it is that they're doing these days, right? And my guess would be it's whatever moment we learned the most clearly that we're not accepted for that. You know what I mean? Like
I
whatever
think you're right.
moment, yeah, that we felt like, oh, I didn't get accepted. And because like we kind of talked about before, connection, belonging are such innate high level needs for us. It's like, okay, I'm not accepted when I'm this way, so I'll just stop being that way. And so the antidote would honestly be more acceptance, but you know.
Well, I think that goes with, a lot of the work on belonging versus fitting in. And that's, from Brene Brown's work and looking at some of her stuff. But, she talks about we all want to belong. And I think that goes with even what you talked about with sexuality and intimacy, right? We want to belong to something, but it's different than fitting in. So I think that's when you say too, when we find like, how can I fit in versus belong? I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. I'm curious as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking like, well, I have two questions. First question I have is, have you noticed that when someone suffers an injury or they become disabled or are disabled for whatever reason, that they themselves start seeing themselves as less sexual or not as sexual because maybe of how society treats them around their sexuality?
We have found that in our research is that there is and we don't know why, but there's less of a sex drive with women post spinal cord injury in some research. And I'm wondering if that's the case of looking at, ourselves, if we have a spinal cord injury differently. I also know when I started doing this research, and once again, no judgment, but it was eye-opening to me to where a lot of people just assume if you have a disability, you're asexual.
Yeah.
And, and when you talk to these men and women, they go, it's not like the switch just got turned off. I still have desires, wants, and needs. And we also know with prior research too, is that women do have, what they've told us, have more difficulty dating post-injury versus men. But yeah, the ADA was written years ago, the Americans with Disabilities Act, but we still, I think, have a long way to go of just embracing. There's been so much amazing work, I would say, in the last 10 years to really celebrate different abilities as sexual beings.
Why do you think it is that women have a harder time dating after injury as opposed to men?
Just my candid, like off the cuff, first thing I'm like, yeah. I think it goes back to basic, body image, feminism, there's still a lot of, I think, stigma or around what women should look like, what women should be. Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. That does make sense. This is really interesting to me because like I said, I've interviewed, obviously not all members of Live Jasmine have a disability, but I've interviewed several that do. And so I'm wondering, are you finding that sex tech or AI or online platforms like Jasmine, that people who have these disabilities are leaning more on these things? Or how are they having their needs met if they are not partnered or
We don't know for sure out of our research. So listening to you and just becoming familiar with, Live Jasmine, I don't know. I would think so. I know that AI, there's been a couple posts recently where AI, because I follow a lot of women with different disabilities, on different social media platforms, is that AI, it was one post to where she was able to reconfigure her body so like she was walking again. And that it was really surreal seeing a body that's in a chair walking. So I think there's a lot of psychosocial, components with that. I do know that some of the people we've interviewed have talked about that they have used, have deferred to it, prostitution. There's also sex robots out now. So I know that is around, but we haven't done a lot of research in that area.
yeah, I mean,
I would think so.
that's my guess because if
Mhm.
the needs are still there and they are in touch with them enough, like the drive, if you're not partnered or finding someone to work it out with, like what do you do? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And it's
you're giving me
really
some.
easy to just go to a bar and catch a fish one night or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Well, and they will. Some of the men that we interviewed did say that going to a bar was a pain because they go, women come up and ask us questions like you would never ask someone who was, standing or able-bodied. And they're like, one guy said, and I'm sitting there thinking, I don't even know if I want to buy you a beer. And you're asking me like if I can, have an erection. So that didn't come out right.
A little forward. Okay.
Totally forward. But I just listening to, I'm like, oh, we need to research that because I would think just in the last 5 years, how I think using the internet to get your sexual needs met is becoming more accepted. I would think. I mean, this is your line of work, not mine, but I would assume it's becoming more common and accepted.
I would say what's become more accepted and popular in the last 5 years is interaction with getting your sexual needs met with another human being. So some form of online
Mhm.
adult work, or I mean, honestly, during the pandemic, OnlyFans became huge.
Huge.
And I've talked to a lot of the top OnlyFans models, and do you want to know where a lot of them, where most of their money comes from? It's not from the pictures, it's from the messaging. That's the feature that makes
Interesting.
them the most money, is the messaging. And that tells me, and obviously I've interviewed so many models on Live Jasmine and so many members, and they say and indicate similar things. It's the interaction component that people are wanting more than anything.
Mhm.
That's what it is. Yeah.
I think you're spot on. I'm not surprised when you said that. And just what we saw, just what we learned in the last 4 years is that the need to connect on an intimate level is so much more important. And I think you're seeing that also with, I'll use the example. This is just in general on a university campus, which I think with my work, because I really look at sexuality, intimacy, social connections, right? Because if you don't have the social connections and intimacy, I mean, there's, right, it all kind of intertwines to have a really healthy relationship. And what we have seen is our student organizations, I can speak for ours in our school, have just exploded. Where 5 years ago it was hard to get students to sign up, and now people really want that connection. So after you said that, I thought for sure it was the pictures. I've just become more familiar with OnlyFans because I think people don't realize it's all people with all different types of careers that are on OnlyFans.
Oh yeah. So the
Yeah.
OnlyFans kind of became the mainstream, but Jasmine has over 100 millionaires. They've become millionaires from just scamming. That's it. And when I interview them, a model will tell me, yeah, I was in a private call for 10 hours. What? How are you in a private call for 10 hours? What's going on? We're just watching movies together. They just want to watch movies together. And I'm like, oh, they tell me more. It's like, oh, their regular will take them into a call and say, just live your life, like just work, eat, whatever. And I'm going to work. I have work to do, but keep the camera on. They just want to feel like they're with someone, like
Someone.
there, like someone would be there, if you were living in a house together and doing your own thing. And that is so much of what happens. I've interviewed, and actually a lot of the members I interviewed, a few of them that were that had disabilities, they have one model in particular that they have really connected with.
And the model has a disability?
No, the members have a
Okay.
disability.
Okay.
But they've been seeing her for, let's say, 8 years, 10 years. And the model will tell me, he's never seen me nude. He's never asked.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll ask them, is this true? And they'll say, yeah, that's not what I like about her. I like her friendship. I like her companionship. And after these 2 years I have spent doing the interviews I've been doing, no one can convince me, because I've heard too many firsthand accounts of realizing people are paying by the minute for connection. They are not paying by the minute for sexual content. That's free. That's the porn. You know what I mean? It's free. But there is this, and I hope all researchers jump on this. I'm wondering, are we more lonely these days? Why are these platforms becoming so successful and popular? What are your thoughts?
So yeah, I think, in 2015, Time Magazine did a little article and said loneliness is going to be our biggest public health issue. And I found that when I was doing some research on loneliness and social isolation. So we've done some research with the spinal cord injury population during the pandemic. And we found, they were a pretty resilient bunch, but being in the School of Public Health, loneliness and social isolation and social disconnectedness are really serious issues right now. And I think that's why we've seen the mental health skyrocket for sure. And, we all got used to working from home. A lot of people, most of us have not gone back full time. We can be more efficient at home. Because I kind of joked the other day, I went, weird, humans take time. We were at home and so productive because we weren't seeing anyone. So we were just working away, or whatever, and there were so many people who were just so depressed and different things. But when you go into the office, you had the office lunches, you had to walk down the hall to talk to someone. When all that's gone, you get this, right, this work ethic of that we can work all the time, but yet we aren't seeing people at the level we did before. And I think it really is a serious issue, and the social disconnectedness and not feeling like you're connecting with others has a direct link with depression and anxiety. I mean, I think technology changed. I'm old enough. When I was a teenager, I had a party line where my parents could like click in, right? So technology has made it on one stance, we can connect with people all over the country, right? People that we would not have stayed in touch with in all parts of our lives, to where if you moved or did something, you no longer connected with them. On the other hand, it's made it so easy. I even think with email, it's changed how we communicate. Like, people don't have to talk at work. And there's so much lost in email. So I think the loneliness it is, you have to, once again, but on the other hand, social media can also make you connect more. So I think that made it just easier to stay at home, because I'm thinking even you and I, if we were in a room across from each other, you could see my nonverbal communication skill. It would be so different. So I think the technology has it's shifted it. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. I think it's just really shifted how we connect. Because then on the other hand, you may have, and I'm thinking of a lot of our individuals who are in rural America living with disabilities, have a much high, are much more lonely, depressed. They aren't connected with a big rehabilitation hospital that may have a big social support network and system, to where, the live Jasmin probably meets a lot of their needs. That it'd be interesting, would they be more lonely if that didn't even exist?
That is what some researchers I've talked to have said that they think, is that it's filling a need the best way it can, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And without getting something, like something is better than absolutely nothing.
Right. Right. And what we found out too is the shift quickly to telehealth and telemedicine with so many different populations. We became really creative in a lot of the recreation therapy programs around the country, of meeting that social and connection piece for people with disabilities that we weren't doing, right? If you lived in the rural country and couldn't drive to the dance or to the, the educational forum, you just didn't go. To where it shifted us to be really creative. So we're probably, those individuals are connecting more where they wouldn't have before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, kind of as you're talking, I'm thinking, I think as time moves back, people were a little bit more either tribal, just in tribes, like if we go really far back, we were actually in tribes, and you really you needed each other to survive, which is actually part of our programming for why we desire connection so much. It means survival on a very basic instinctual.
Yeah.
Yes. But I do think that as time has gone on, and life and civilization has advanced in its technology, its way of life, because we don't necessarily need so many people to survive anymore, this like individual lifestyle has become a lot more popular. But because we can easily survive on our own, technically, right? Like, you can go to the store and you don't have to hunt. You don't need a husband to hunt your dinner anymore.
DoorDash, yeah.
Yeah, you don't even have to go to the store anymore. You just press one button on your phone.
Right.
It's there. So that has made it easy for us to be more alone, these advancements. But sometimes I wonder if maybe just like physiologically, we're not prepared to be as alone as what we are, even though we can technically do it. But
yeah, I mean, just talking with you tonight, now I have some new research ideas. Like, I'm really curious if, the live cam, it's just, like I said, I was trained in the disability world. So it's been really exciting for me learning more and more about the world of just sexuality. And, everyone has different needs and desires and wants. And before our interview, I even wrote down, it's a quote I used years ago when I started talking and training healthcare professionals, because that's one of the things I'm thinking about too, is I'm going to talk about this as an option in my training now. because everyone has different needs. And so when someone has a disability or an illness, it's usually the medical professionals they're going to go to ask questions. And the quote I tell people is, if we listen without judgment, we always get a better story. Isn't that great? Jen Piatt. And it's because we all have our own biases about sexuality and what it means, but what might be right for me isn't going to be right for someone else. And if they're enjoying it and getting pleasure out of it, and it's not hurting anyone and it's consensual.
I can't tell you how much I loved that quote and what you said. And to be honest, exactly what you're talking about is one of the biggest reasons we started this project, which was just to get information out there in a way that may help people be a little bit less judgmental. You know, I have interviewed models who were in abusive marriages.
I bet it's
To
heartbreaking.
heartbreaking abusive marriages with small children,
Mm-hmm.
to men who were providing, so they couldn't leave. And modeling and camming was their way out.
Mm-hmm.
And I have one model in particular I'm thinking of, but she says it literally saved her life because things were getting so bad that it was going to end probably in a really bad situation. And so then when I hear it's like, or see people attacking or judging someone like that when they don't even know the story
Right.
or the fact. So, yeah, I mean, this is supporting 3 young kids, saved a woman's life. But also, I know for a fact that what that interaction that she's giving people is potentially life saving, you know? And so we just wanted people to have a more full picture because
I
you're right.
love it.
What you said, if we listen without judgment, we get a better story.
Mm-hmm. That's
I
it.
hope you post that on your social media and everything.
I
So
have. I'm like Jen Piatt, but yeah, because even for me, I learned so much because I was raised, rural Nebraska, very conservative, right? You didn't talk about it. And we have to talk about it. So I love this project. And just even when I was going through everything, I went, oh wow, I hadn't even thought about, being interviewed um, by a group that's doing the live cam, but it's great. And yeah, you're right. Everyone, um, I just think it's fascinating for sure. I'd gone up and did a training for one of the VA medical centers and just talked about the importance of the psychosocial piece of sexuality and just about connecting. And that's what they wanted, connecting with my partner again. The men said, I'm in a wheelchair, but I want to hold my woman, my partner's hand or, my boyfriend's hand. And I had one physician follow me after my talk. And he said, you know what? I've been a physician for over 20 years. And not once did I ask one of my spinal cord injury patients what type of intimate relationship was important to them. I had covered, the biological piece of how everything works. And it was it was one of the most profound times for me as a researcher. He said, you just changed how I'm going to approach my patients. I'm going to ask that question now.
yeah, that's beautiful.
That's
That's
great.
so beautiful. I love it. The ripple effect.
Yeah, yeah.
What would you say are some of the misconceptions that you've seen in regards to people who have disabilities about their sexuality that you have found just are not true?
That they're asexual. I think that's the number one thing, or that they just don't want to date, um, or that their body, won't work in a certain way. But I think the number one thing is the assumption of they're not sexual beings. We've seen that with some of the training, or another population we've worked with is parents who have a son or daughter who's autistic,
Mm.
and having that conversation, because we're all, like you and I talked, we're all sexual beings. And really, it's tricky because some parents, and you have to defer to the guardian and the parent, don't want the conversation at all. And we may, and some of the therapists that I've worked with train, they say, we know that their son or daughter is sexually active, but legally the guardian isn't allowing us to have the conversation. So I think that's one of the other things, and it's tricky, right? It's not, once again, there's not, but that, yeah, even parents or guardians, even being uncomfortable or fearful to have the conversation, we just have to make it, do you want lasagna for dinner? What do you like sexually, right? Wouldn't it be great if it was just a simple, common conversation?
That's what it needs to get to. I think that that is also part of the goal of, you doing your research and having conversations, us all having conversations like this, is to just normalize things around sexuality. It's okay. We're all sexual to some degree. You know what I mean? Yeah, I was talking to someone the other day and they were saying, wouldn't it be great if, someone could walk into the room and just be like, oh my goodness, I just had the best orgasm.
Yeah, and then just have the conversation about it, for sure. Now, I want to circle back to when you said one of the things that really surprised me is that I said, that people with disabilities are asexual. We've also had feedback from some of the people we've worked with saying, but wait a minute, I am asexual and I have a disability. And so I think that's important too, is don't assume everyone, that people aren't asexual.
Yeah, don't assume. You know what I mean? Yeah, just don't assume at all.
Yeah.
Really interesting. I'm curious if there's anything about your work or your research or human sexuality or connection as a whole that we haven't touched on, but it's important for you to share or you want to share.
Oh gosh, I mean, you've been really thorough. I took a couple notes of some things that I wanted to bring up, and I think you touched on them.
Okay, good. My final question for you is, what are your thoughts on what our next steps are in building a more sexually positive society?
I think continuing to have the conversations, just just like what you're doing now, is making the conversation normalized.
Yeah, I agree. Just normalizing it. If I walked into that room and
Yeah.
said I had a sandwich, everyone would be okay. But if I said I had the best orgasm, people would be offended and might have me arrested. You know what I mean?
Or I'm even thinking, if you said, hey, I'm really trying to promote, live Jasmin. It's, online cameras, right? There's certain places you can have that conversation and others. So I think just continuing to make sure that conversations are happening so that people feel really comfortable.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. This was just such a pleasure. You are so good at this. You
I
are
know.
so,
Thank
yeah.
you.